Okay, let's start. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chiara Davalli, and I'm project manager at EBN, the European Business Innovation Center Network, one of the partners, part of the Compass team, Compass Consortium. Before introducing you today's session and the Compass project, I would give you a couple of logistic information, practical information about this webinar. First of all, we are going through a more or less 1 hour session that is going to be recorded. So the recordings will be made available tomorrow to all the registered participants, together with the presentations we'll be showing today. We expect you to be an active part of this session. So you have a chat box that you can use during the world session to raise questions or comments regarding what is going to be presented and discussed together with our experts and of course with you. So please feel free to write down whatever comes to your mind, and we'll be taking these comments and questions during the session. Okay, so I think you can see my screen, and we have a plan for the next 55 minutes. Short introduction on my side, then we'll count on Katarina Germay, our coordinator from WU Institute for Managing Sustainability, to introduce us the concept of responsible innovation. And then we'll go into the core, I would say, of the session. So the presentation of the co-creation method kit that inspired and basically is guiding the ORI lab methodology that Compass developed and deployed over the last few years. So we'll do this with Christophe Gauche from SDS, Strategic Design Scenarios, and then we'll start a conversation with other partners and experts that have been running these the so-called responsible innovation labs. So the experiences driven by the methodology that we are presenting today. So together with Catherine Flick from the Montfort University and Alex Esteban from La Caixa Foundation, and of course Christophe again, will be talking about how this methodology has been actually implemented in different contexts with different type of companies that have been working that are active in different high-tech sectors in Europe. And then we have time for some questions and conclusions. As I was telling you, feel free to comment, to write your questions, and we'll take them as far as we go ahead with the presentations and the talks. A couple of words about Compass. So to put this session into the wider framework, so it's an Horizon 2020 project that is going to end in a few months, and that involved 7 partners from different countries, and I would say representing different sectors, different souls of the responsible innovation. So we have academic partners, but we also have a foundation. We have designers that have been helping us with the definition of the methodologies, as you will see in a while, and also networks that are more related to companies and to the business support organizations as BLab and EBN. In a nutshell, Compass aims at inspiring, guiding, coaching European SMEs to embed and implement responsible innovation in their business strategies and innovation processes. We have been working with and for companies, SMEs, in order to develop tools and methodologies that will help them manage their research, development, and innovation activities in a responsible and inclusive manner. So, according to the ROI main drivers, I would say. We have been doing this mainly working in 3 hubs, sectorial and geographical hubs. So we have been working with companies in the cybersecurity sector in the UK, in the nanotech sector in Belgium, and in the biomedicine sector in Spain. And we'll actually hear the experiences of these 3 clusters, let's say, these 3 hubs, later on. The outcomes of the project are different, as I was telling you, tools and methods and materials aimed at supporting really companies. So we have a self-check tool, some training materials, inspiring case studies, and sectorial roadmaps on how indeed responsible innovation can be embedded in the different context. Today, we are mainly focusing indeed on the co-creation methods that helped and allowed us as a consortium to then develop the sectorial roadmaps for indeed cybersecurity, nanotechnology, and biomedicine. We are going through this choreography in a while together with Christophe, but as I was telling you, Compass is going to be released. The final version of the Compass platform is going to be released in a few months, and so it will present different elements aimed at supporting companies. So of course this methodology that we are presenting today is one of the core elements. We'll be also have a session dedicated to the already developed sectorial roadmaps that can provide concrete suggestions on how to translate responsible innovation principles into practice, and an online self-check tool that is a diagnostic tool that aims at supporting, helping SMEs assessing their strengths and potential for improvements in terms of responsible innovation. It's a tool that is based on concrete examples and specific measures, so it's also an inspirational tool that really aims to, first of all, introduce the responsible innovation concept in a more practical and tangible way to companies through actual practices that companies know, and also allowing them to really assess where do they stand in terms of responsible approaches and practices. So this tool is going to be made available online in February, at the end of February, and it will be available for everyone who wants to use it. We are going for an open consultation, so for a few months we'll be also collecting feedback from companies and other users on the tool itself, so that we can still make some small improvements in the very last phase of the project. We'll be organizing another webinar specifically for this tool in 1 month or so, when indeed we'll be launching it online. Last but not least, as I was telling you, the project is going to finish quite soon, in April. So we would invite you to join us for our final event, the Innovation Relaunched conference, the 26th of March here in Brussels. And it's going to be a day dedicated to practicing responsible innovation methods, tools. So really we want to share with you our experiences and also test with you some of the tools we have developed. And of course we'll have insights from the companies on indeed how projects like this one and commission and actually the overall innovation ecosystem can better support companies towards indeed responsible business practices. So I stop here, and I would give the floor to Caterina Yermai, who's going to introduce us to the responsible innovation concept.
Thank you, Kyra. Okay, here we go. So when we talk about responsible innovation, we talk about the combination of two terms that are each of them well established in a business context. Innovation is a term that we use to describe novel solutions that, depending on the definition, have either been introduced to a market or have actually already been successful on a market. When we think about innovation, we often first think about technological innovation, such as the LED light bulb or a novel, fair version of a smartphone. But innovation can actually also take the form of an innovative service, such as, for example, the bike sharing facilities that have sprung up across cities in Europe in the past few years. Innovation can also take the form of process innovation, marketing innovation, or even business model innovation. What's important in any case is to remember that innovation is something novel, and that it creates a temporary competitive advantage for the company that has brought this innovation to the market. Responsibility in a business context has a range of aspects. It ranges from philanthropy via stakeholder involvement to considerations of company impact on its environment, be it social or environmental. Today, responsibility usually refers to two aspects. On the one hand, responsible management of business operations, and on the other hand, a business's responsibility for the impact of its products or services on people and the environment. When we put the two together, we arrive at the concept of responsible innovation. And in a nutshell, we can say that responsible innovation is about doing everything in your power to increase the positive impact of your innovation and to, at the same time, to minimize potential negative impact of your innovation. Regarding positive impact, we can find orientation in normative concepts, such as, for example, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. When it comes to minimizing potential negative impact, things become a bit more complex. This is due to the fact that we cannot foresee the future, and that the impact of today's action is not clear and involves a high level of uncertainty. This is especially true in highly dynamic contexts, where we cannot be sure about future impact of our innovations. There might be new knowledge that comes into existence. There might be others reusing or adapting the innovation, and there might just be changing contextual conditions. So we cannot predict what's going to happen, but what we can do to minimize potential negative impact is to anticipate what kind of social or environmental impact we can imagine. We can reflect what we want, what kind of impact we want to create, what we already know, and also what we don't know. We can engage with various stakeholders to develop a diverse set of perspectives, and we can make sure that we have the right actions in place in our company to innovate responsibly. And this last part about actions and having the right ones in place and developing an action plan is what my colleagues will be talking about now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kati. Thank you very much. Okay, So I would now ask Christophe to, take the floor. I'm going to share the screen so that we, okay. And
okay, so hello everyone. This is Christophe from Strategic Design Scenarios, as Kyra introduced. So what Katrina was just presented was somehow really well implemented within this Compass project. So the challenge for us was basically, how do we engage SMEs on a journey towards responsible innovation? To do so, we have collectively developed what we call the RI Lab for Responsible Innovation Labs, saying that we need basically to take a step-by-step process to enter this concept of RRI, and also come closer in the end to something that starts looking like a real action plan and concrete steps towards it. This RI lab has been tested. We will come back on the feedbacks of those past experiences on the 3 sectors Kyra has presented to you earlier. For the moment, I will just go and give you this overview of this journey that the Compass project is offering. So the first step into this RI lab, and maybe you can, Kyra, you can pass the first step. Yes, here we go. So the first step of this RI lab journey started with a series of what we called scoping interviews. Of course, at that stage, what I maybe forgot to mention is that we do gather a series of interested participants, interested SMEs, and maybe one word on that is, I mean, that journey towards RI is meant not only to, you know, companies who have already reflected on their responsibility, on their practices, but also some that are a bit further from those considerations and are more at a level of just curiosity towards RRI. So that is also why this series of scoping interviews is a key element, where we will look into making sure that we understand very well the expectations of the willing participants, that we will also start familiarizing them with the responsible innovation practices and spirit, and of course also present and introduce the journey that they will start engaging in. Then a second phase, which you can also show, Kyra, is what we called building the community. Building the community meaning engaging also into a peer-to-peer process. This is taking the shape of a series of a first webinar, basically putting a bit the question frontward on are your research and innovation process responsible? In that case, in that webinar, the idea is also to start building a reflexive conversation on the responsibility of a sector-specific group of companies, setting up also starting this working group. Of course, continuing familiarizing with responsible innovation, but also getting to see some examples and benefits and barriers to RRI. And of course, to then engage into the preparation of the step 2, which is the co-development workshop. So Kyra, now you may show the second phase. So I would say the big first moment that usually everyone remembers in that journey is clearly this first initial workshop, which we call the Forward-Looking workshop. As Katerina has shown, responsibility is also very much linked to the future impacts on society, on environment, on a series of contexts. Therefore, one of the first things we need to do is to reflect on our practices, our impact, and reflect on the also strategic context we are evolving in as a company. So basically, this first workshop, which is done within the company or as a group of companies, we will later on discuss a bit the adaptations of that methodology I am presenting now. But this moment is really a moment where we look at two things. In one hand, we do look into understanding the challenges and opportunities in the future, going also beyond only sector-specific challenges, but rather to step back a little bit, open the eyes a little bigger, to get the bigger picture of societal context, of societal challenges, and to see how somehow some of them might be of relevance and of importance towards what we are developing as a company or as a group of companies within one sector. So looking at that future, we try also to start picturing a desirable vision of responsible innovation at the company level and sector level. So this is where we bring a second tool within that initial workshop, which is this self-check tool that Kyra has introduced a little earlier. And that self-check tool is basically asking the question, where do you stand so far in terms of responsible practices? So by doing this initial diagnosis somehow, so looking forward, looking into the future, discussing the future challenges that we need to be thinking of, or at least have somewhere in the corner of our heads, and at the same time, self-diagnosis of the company practices through the self-check tool. Then that leads us to a tiny little step that just appeared on the screen. It's called review by CSOs. Basically, here in the RI lab journey, we also care for the inclusion of stakeholders in the process, and especially also civil society organizations. In the responsible innovation, this is one part of the practice that the practices that it is putting forward is to open up the innovation. Therefore, in the process, we also consider and see really as an added value to also share the results of that initial forward-looking workshop with civil society organizations as a way to complete a little more the perspective of the evolution of that sector and of the companies involved. Then there is what we call a vision exploration webinar. This forward-looking workshop that I just talked about leads to building a common vision of the future, and a vision in which we have implemented responsible innovation practices. So this vision exploration webinar basically aims at reviewing collectively the relevance, the coherence of the responsible innovation vision that have been elaborated in the step 2, and try to infer from the generic vision that has been built at the sector level, when this has been done as a group of companies, then a more specific responsible innovation vision at company and business level. This is also a moment where we need to kind of digest what has been done before and look with fresh eyes and a bit also critical eyes the coherence and pertinence of what has been built before. Then that leads us to the fourth phase, yes, exactly, which is called the backcasting roadmaps workshop. We just said that in step 2, we are trying to build somehow a desirable vision of responsible innovation in the future. And of course, this is, a good wish list in a way, but this shall not be left as a wish list. It needs to be turned at some point into a very concrete set of actions. So basically, the backcasting roadmaps is a moment in which we will look at the vision and say, how do we make that vision achievable? So how do we reach that vision that we have co-developed together? So basically here we will build roadmaps from the present situation to reach the expected vision that has been built. And here every company is building its own roadmap as a path towards responsible innovation. And of course, all those roadmaps shall be specific because they're based on each company's specific context, specific culture, also internal culture and practices, and so on. However, this individual roadmaps leads us to a final stage where we also find it worth looking transversally in between those roadmaps. And this is what we call the testing webinar, where basically it's time to harvest what we have built together and again look with fresh eyes and very critical eyes the feasibility of the roadmaps. Are those roadmaps credible? Are they indeed achievable and ambitious enough, or bold enough to transform indeed the existing practices and implement a more ambitious path towards RRI? And then the very, very, very final little stage is after that testing webinar, which is also a collective moment. There is one small tip that you can show also, Kyra, is the what we call this review by researchers. We believe, again, that within this RRI set of principles, as I said before, on the inclusion of stakeholders in research and development. I mentioned the civil society organizations as part of stakeholders, but of course, researchers themselves are part of these stakeholders. And I'm talking here about researchers that are outside the companies and startups and so on, and the SMEs that are involved in the process. But basically here, we want, again, external eyes and critical ones to look into those roadmaps, but also to compare those roadmaps, to identify similarities and comparisons in between the roadmaps, and to kind of also grasp kind of a sector level portrait of those roadmaps. So this is the general journey of the IRAB. For each of them, there are specific tools, specific tips and tricks on facilitation, on how do you run it properly. All that is being put into one responsible innovation kit for the moment, which will be made available at the event Kyra has mentioned earlier. And this kit contains everything from also the adaptations that you may bring to this kit, to this methodology, sorry, so that you match it towards to your own context. But just as a final word on this, this responsible innovation lab journey really, and we've tested it as, for me, a double value. On one side, it really offers an opportunity for a company to step back and take a breath and engage into a team-based, reflexive, and strategic break over their practices and ways of doing. So this is also rare as an occasion to kind of, pause a little bit and have a really deep, reflexive moment on practices, on where do we go, what is it that we want to have as an impact as a business, etc. And then, of course, the second value, which is the most obvious one, is indeed a clear roadmap towards this implementation of responsible innovation practices.
Thank you, Christophe. I think we had a good overview about the overall responsible innovation labs, the co-creation methodology that is proposed to participants throughout a series of different steps. I remind you all attendees that you can raise questions and write them down or comments so we can answer or react to them. In the meantime, I would move to the next step of this online session. That is the discussion or the talk with our partners that have been running the Responsible Innovation Labs in the three contexts I was mentioning you before. So the biomedicine one in Spain, the cybersecurity one in the UK, and the Nanotech one in Belgium. So we have thought about a couple of questions to drive a little bit the conversation. So I would start with the first question and maybe ask Catherine Flick to start the conversation. So the question is how. So indeed, Christophe presented us a methodology, a method that is kind of an inspirational tool, is the basic for then running the labs. So the question is how the methodology worked in practice, and particularly in your case in the UK in the cybersecurity sector. So there were something that you did differently, how you implemented the steps that Christophe presented, and do you think that the sector you worked with was kind of influencing the way you had to run the lab?
Hopefully everyone can hear me. Yes, thank you, Kyra. Definitely we had a very different or slightly different experience working with cybersecurity companies in the UK. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, cybersecurity companies tend to be quite secretive and quite private about their business practices, and they're very concerned about intellectual property. I mean, obviously every company is concerned about that, but we found that they were much less inclined to discuss in-depth company information and strategies with other cybersecurity companies. So while they're quite happy to discuss on a higher level various philosophical or other concepts to do with cybersecurity generally, when it came to business practice, they were quite hesitant to share. So what we had to do in this case was to work with individual companies rather than making it a peer session like Christophe's example. So where instead of doing the forward-looking workshop with a group of companies, we actually worked with each company separately. And that was quite an interesting process because we had people from all levels of the company for the most part, or quite a lot of the senior management, or in one case we had the entire company there of 7 or 8 people. And that made it quite an interesting activity because it meant that we could really get into the in-depth details of the exact actions that they could implement within their company that would actually have some meaning for them within their company, rather than a more general approach that a company in a particular sector might want to take. However, this came with a few disadvantages in that because the companies themselves were very well-meaning and they had quite a lot of interest in ethics generally and things like corporate social responsibility, they weren't really experts on RRI and or on responsible innovation specifically, and so it required quite a lot of expertise on the part of the facilitators to be able to ask the right sorts of questions to prompt the discussion to go in the responsible innovation kind of directions. Otherwise, we would have just been left with a lot of things for HR to do in terms of, say, recruiting, and that would have been about it. So it meant that we had to take a slightly different approach. So instead of we actually started quite early with the recruitment phase being a little bit different. We actually had to go and we found it quite difficult to recruit companies because of the fact that we were trying to originally do something that wouldn't actually work with those sorts of companies. So we actually ended up having to do talks and things at their events, and we managed to get some very good companies to work with us. But we skipped pretty much all of the webinars. We mostly just did the workshops, the face-to-face workshops. So we did a scoping interview to begin with. Then we did this forward-looking workshop. Then what happened, instead of doing the vision exploration webinar, we actually took the outputs of the forward-looking workshop and we created a report to send back to the company, which was then used as reflection for the backcasting workshop. So this is sort of the way that we dealt with the intermediate aspects there. We also got review in that report. We were able to do the review by CSOs and other organizations and get some help with some specific questions that the companies had in terms of responsible innovation. And then finally, instead of doing a testing webinar, we created another very specifically tailored roadmap just for that company, which we did a general one for cybersecurity, which we abstracted out of those roadmaps, which is the one that you will see on the website when it's released. But we also created very specific timelines for each company, which they really appreciated. So what I think it really shows about the method is that it's quite flexible. You can make it really fit whatever company process, whatever sort of processes work with the sector that you're working with. Or if you're a company yourself and you want to run it yourself, you could easily do it yourself. And I think one of the changes that we've made since then is that we're going to use the self-check tool as some of the prompt questions for the forward-looking workshop, and I think that works quite well for the. I think that will probably work better, and perhaps not require there to be someone so expert in responsible innovation as our facilitators were. So thanks, Kyra, for that question.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much. I really like the comment. So the point you shared about asking the right questions, and now you were just closing saying that the self-check tool can be a useful tool in this sense to really drive the conversation towards.
Yes, I think there are some slight disadvantages, of course. I think not having the peer companies discuss the issues with each other means that you can have a slightly insular kind of exercise, and it can get a little bit philosophical and a bit kind of navel gazing, if that makes sense. But this is where the facilitator really needs to kind of take control and make sure that the conversation is actually a critical and reflective conversation and not just a sort of philosophical exercise that takes people out of the office for a couple of hours. So,
right. Okay, I would ask Alex if you can share your experience. So, same question. How was the experience of the biomedicine oral lab in Spain? In the meantime, we are collecting your questions. So after the first round, we go to your questions. Okay, so Alex.
Right. Thank you very much, Kyra, and good afternoon, everyone. So the labs that we run here in Spain, they were a bit different from what Catherine was describing. Actually, it was different in the sense that we have like a bunch of different companies that could interact with each other and participate together in the different sessions, and that facilitated the way we could exchange all that information and get a lot of discussion about the different topics. Basically, we followed the choreography that is on the screen that Christoph was mentioning before. For us, it was very important, the scoping interview step, because we realized that some of the companies that we were interacting with, they had very little idea about responsible innovation, and actually they were interested also in knowing what it is and what we could offer in the Compass project. So it was very important to talk to them individually, to let them know about all these details, about give them like a framework so they could really see the context and value also if they could also participate. And also they were also very interested in knowing we could get in exchange of participating in our sessions. And there were like 3 different concepts or aspects that really caught their attention. One is first to be part of a group of people that are interested in responsible innovation and applying these good practices in their businesses. The second aspect was that we could offer them also visibility. So these companies, most of them, they were micro companies, they were startups with very small teams, very young companies. They were in very early stage phases of development of the product that they wanted to commercialize. So for them, it was very important to get some visibility and also to reach out to people who could also help them out in their professional process. For example, some of them they need visibility to try to attract investors because of the phase that they were at that moment. Finally, they also thought that it was very important the networking opportunities that they could get from participating in these sessions. As I mentioned, in the end we had like 5 companies, and these companies, they were all from the biomedicine field, but they were also coming from very different subfields. So for example, some of them they were specialized or focusing on medical devices, and some of them they were specialized on drug development. So very different topics. So it was very important for them also to have these networking opportunities, so they could also see if they could engage in collaborations besides the activities that we were running in the Compass project framework. For that reason, the second step, the peer-to-peer webinar, that was very important for them. It was the opportunity to break the ice, to introduce each other to the rest of the people, of the participants. We get an opportunity to talk about their companies, what they were doing, what they needed, why they were participating in these sessions, and also that was the first step also for them to start this networking goals that were included also in the sessions that we were running. Regarding the forward-looking workshop, there was the first face-to-face session that we had here in Barcelona. Most of the companies, they were like from the Spanish ecosystem, so some of them they knew each other, some of them it was a great opportunity to meet new companies and also to see if they could also have collaborations. And something that they really thought that it was very important, it was to have like a small introduction at the very beginning, and then once we had finished the activities, also to have like a session for discussion of all the outcomes of the session, because that was the way they had to really exchange what they thought of the different concepts and the different terms that we were discussing throughout the session. So we split them in different groups. They work in small groups, but at the very end, they thought it was very important to put everything together, to have this very fruitful discussion of the different topics, and realized that actually that they had like many different things in common. For example, most of them, they had concerns about finance, about how to operate in a global market, or about regulation and standards in a global market. And it was very interesting to see that they had so many things to worry about in common about the future of their companies. As I was mentioning, these companies, they were very small companies, very small teams. So one thing that they suggested is to have everything condensed in very let's say small sessions. So they didn't want to like spend much time of their complex agendas like in very long sessions. So for that reason, we had to condense everything in a few hours in each face-to-face sessions. And the step of vision exploration webinar, it was a suggestion that came from these companies. They preferred that instead of having a webinar to discuss everything on site, that we sent them the feedback and the results from the first session, and then they could use their own time to make comments, to provide feedback by email, and then have everything collected, gathered together, so that we could have the discussion at the next face-to-face session, which was at the backcasting roadmap workshop. Another issue we had with these companies is that since they had very small teams, it was very difficult to get the commitment of the same person attending to all the sessions. So we had to get a compromise with them, and what we did is just we tried to welcome everyone from the company as long as they had been discussing about the activities that we had been running in previous sessions, so that they knew what was going on and what was happening during the session. After that, we had a very final session. It was like sending these final roadmaps for them to review. As Christoph was mentioning, it was very important that we had researchers also participating in this step. And what we did in the biomedicine sector is to get a researcher involved already in the backcasting roadmap workshop, in the face-to-face session. So that researcher was there with the companies. We also invited business supporting organizations, and we had the companies. And it was a great opportunity also, not only for the companies to interact with each other, but also with the companies to interact with business supporting organizations and this researcher to really get more feedback and try to get like a more fruitful discussion. At the very end, when we got the roadmaps, as I said, we sent all this to different participants, the version of the roadmaps that we prepared, and basically we are right now collecting all the different comments and feedback from the different parts of the sessions where they participated. With this, I would the biomedicine sector.
Thanks a lot for the overview on the biomedicine sector. And yes, actually, you were also already answering one of the questions that we received from one of the participants on the motivation SMEs. What is the initial motivation of SMEs participating in our activities in the Compass labs and so on? So you were talking about networking opportunities, visibility, and expertise. So I think you already answered partially this question, but we can come back to it in a while. Before, I would ask Christoph if he can add the experience, let's say, add a few comments presenting the experience of the Nanotech lab in Belgium.
Yeah, thank you. So very shortly on the nanotechnology sector, we actually followed quite well the original lab methodology, but again, we, as we all said, this is, you know, a spinal bone that you may follow, but you're free also to divert a little bit or adapt it. So basically, on the nanotechnology sector that we had in Belgium, what was slightly complicated is basically to consider nanotechnology as a sector. Nanotechnology is not a sector in itself, meaning that we have an extremely diverse set of companies working on absolutely totally different things, and the only thing they have in common is that they work at nano level. So yeah, I will not go too much in details, but basically maybe to echo one of the questions that has been asked on the motivation, what we know is that the companies we had for the nanotechnology sector in Belgium were, I would say we had two diverse cases. One being quite advanced into responsible innovation, and really kind of looking at going even further and being even better at doing responsible innovation. So with the strong ethics, etc. But from, directly in the DNA of the company, in its own spirit directly. So just going further in a way. And finally, the other case was, as I was saying very early, a case of curiosity. So just having companies don't know anything about responsible innovation, but just being curious, wanting to know more and to find out more about it. That's two cases of totally different motivations that we had, for example, in Belgium.
Thank you, Christophe. Okay, so we are about to finish. I would ask our let's say my colleagues to maybe react to a couple of questions that you shared with us now on the chat. One, indeed, it's about motivation. Alex and Christophe already answered, and maybe another thing that has been asked, is there any analysis of early warnings or non-intended consequences of innovations, and how can companies know the info and evaluate hazards through the ORI approach? Quite a big question. And I would complete, maybe if you can also share one sentence about major challenges you faced if you want to add, because you already shared quite a lot already, but if you have anything else you want to share in terms of challenges, opportunities, the methodology and the instrument of the labs offers and offered in the labs you managed. So I would ask Catherine to start, as I know that she has to really leave in 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, so certainly, so I'm an academic and my research area is specifically in ethics of emerging technologies. So this first question about the analysis of early warnings is right up my alley. There has been quite a lot of analysis of early warning stuff, mostly in the academic area. So there are some papers about things like ethics of emerging technologies that if this person from Mexico, hello, if you're particularly interested, if you get in contact with the organizer, I can send you some links. But there has been quite a lot done on this, mostly in academia, but it's starting to come out into industry too. And certainly using methods like this can actually help to identify what potential issues might come up, because it forces you to think outside the box, not just what can your innovation do, but what impact might your innovation have in different sorts of circumstances that maybe you haven't really thought about. And there's also some other techniques that you can use. So things like sort of devil's advocacy, design for evil, things like that, where you can imagine your innovation being put into certain situations and perhaps being used incorrectly or that sort of thing. So there's definitely quite a few tools and approaches available for that. For the second question, which was about the motivation, I also just want to talk very quickly about the cybersecurity motivation, because that was probably a little bit different, because they hadn't really heard much about responsible innovation before. They were mostly interested in ethics, because that's a common sort of philosophical issue they deal with in cybersecurity. The way that we sort of solved this approach to cybersecurity was to talk about in terms of trust of their users and clients. And they really, trust is the top #1 issue that they have, that they want to build with their clients. And that was a really key aspect to use in terms of selling this kind of approach, because of the fact that this helps to build trust by getting companies to be more open and transparent about their practices, but also engaging with communities that perhaps they wouldn't normally engage with, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a different sort of motivation as well. Thanks, Kyra.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much. Alex, do you want to react to the questions? Any additional comment on your side?
I think that I mostly agree with what Catherine said, and I would stress out again the idea of this opportunity of networking that the companies have when they participate in the sessions. I think it's something that they value a lot, and I'm just saying this because, for example, in the biomedicine lab, a collaboration was born from the participation in these sessions between 2 companies, and I think it's great for them, because it's also a way for them to find resources, especially in the biomedicine sector, where they are in a very early stage in the development of their technologies. I think that's very important, and that's something that it's very good for the sessions that we organize.
Thank you. Thanks. Christophe?
Maybe one word on the first question on identifying at early stage some consequences of innovation. Again, I'm backing up what Catherine has said. I think the first workshop, which is the Forward-Looking workshop, has been quite revealing in some cases, where really you could see that by bringing societal challenges that are sometimes a bit far from these companies and what they're used to, has suddenly also revealed that they could make links and relate to things that are not usual and not usually on the table of discussion of those companies. So clearly that opens up on identifying specific fields where you do not expect to have potentially impacts or even just links to those challenges.
Yeah, thank you. I would ask Katarina, a coordinator, do you have any other comment or you need input you want to share with the audience?
No, thank you. I think the only thing left for me to say is that everyone is welcome to join us at our final project conference in Brussels on March 26th, where they can also experience such a co-creation session live.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much for reminding this. And on my side, just wanted to comment on the 2 questions we received from our attendees. So common answer is this. I would recommend you to look at our case studies that are available on the Innovation Compass website, where you find a few stories of companies that approach the responsible innovation methodology framework. And in particularly, I would highlight the APNP, the Applied Nanoparticles case study, as the approach that they took towards responsible innovation. I think it's really inspiring, especially for us that we are working with SMEs or in SMEs. They are really telling us why they choose responsible innovation, not just for the sake of being responsible, but actually because there were some benefits, clear clear benefits for the business. So basically, they adopted the responsible innovation approach because this would have helped them anticipating indeed lots of troubles or issues they might have faced later on in terms of in legal terms, financial terms, and ethical terms with their clients. So I really recommend you to have a look at the case studies, and particularly this one. And to close this session, the people from AppNP should confirm this week their presence to our final conference. So I think it will be great for you also to meet there in that occasion. So I repeat, 26th of March, you are all invited to Innovation Relaunched, our final conference. I thank you all for your attention and participation today, and I would particularly thank my colleagues that have helped me in running this conversation today. As I was telling you, we'll be sending you recordings and presentations soon, if not tomorrow, beginning of next week. Stay in touch, email us, tweet us for whatever you might need from our side. Thank you, and have a good afternoon, everybody. Bye.